Awesome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, again to Denning's Point Distillery, and happy Cider Week New York. So this idea is a perfect example of the kind of programming that Susan Johnson likes to do here at Denning's Point Distillery. We're so fortunate to have her in our community, and Carl as well, helping build this beautiful business that does all this great community programming. I'm Scott Ramsey, and normally I introduce myself as the executive producer and owner of Fort Beacon Studios when I'm here. But today, you may not know, but I'm also the executive director of the New York Cider Association. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this event and welcome you to Cider Week New York. This is going to be a really great evening. We have a lot of really fantastic experts in the room. We want this to be super conversational. It is Cider Week New York, and we want this to be all about learning about cider and the apple here in Hudson Valley and all the amazing things that are happening in the craft beverage space with the apple. So not only is it happening with cider, but it's also happening with brandies and pommeaus in the craft beverage space and distilled spirits and fermentation. So we're going to cover the whole gamut. So as we get started, I just want to introduce the folks here to my left. This is Dan Fenyo, and he's the distiller here at Denning's Point Distillery. And then we have Chris Jackson, who is the cider maker at Treasury Ciderat Fishkill Farms. And we also... yes, exactly. He's also my boss because he is the president of the New York Cider Association. Which I just conveniently forgot. Don't you love that, Chris? We also have Alana. Exactly. We also have Alana McGovern, who is pouring drinks back at the bar, a major bartender here at Denning's Point Distillery. And we have Tim Guy, who's pouring cider over here from Treasury Cider. So be sure and enjoy some ciders. So the reason why this event is so special is because it really does start with the apple. And when we talk about New York cider, we always talk about the fact that it starts with the apple. And we are really fortunate here in New York State, and especially the Hudson Valley, because the apple is so important to this region, not only the state, but especially the region. And there's a lot of history that comes with that. And we are also very fortunate here in Beacon to have our resident historian, who has been enlisted and in active duty since 1995, enlisted with the Army. He's an Army officer. He's also my dear friend. We do cannons and cocktails here at the distillery. He is also a professor of history at the United States Military Academy at West Point. So I'm going to introduce you to Colonel Sean Sculley. So I can't do an event here without Sean stepping in to do some talking about a little bit of history. So he's going to share a little bit of context with us about the history of the apple in New York State. But let's go all the way back. Like, where do apples actually originally come from?
All right. So the apple originally comes from the Garden of Eden. I'm sorry.
Depends on
history.
Right.
So actually, the apple originates out of Kazakhstan, where modern day Kazakhstan is today. So Central Asia, and that's where they first grew, but then they were intentionally moved and cultivated throughout the ancient world. So ancient Egyptians grew apples, the Greeks grew apples, Romans grew apples, and then from there it moved to Europe.
Wow. Okay. So how does it get over to the United States, or I guess the colonies, right?
Well, so luckily after the fall of the Roman Empire, the monasteries saved a couple of things. One, written language. Two, at least in European languages. And then two, they saved apple cultivation. So they actually grew apples in France, Germany, England, and from there, that was then the English transported the apple to North America.
Okay.
So in 1630, the Puritans landed in Massachusetts Bay, and within days they were planting apple trees.
Oh, wow.
In order to begin to cultivate apples, because they knew how important they were going to be, not only to themselves but to their livestock.
So livestock, I was going to say, it always comes down to economy, right? So they know it's going to help feed the livestock. Any other aspect of their economic landscape that they would immediately start to plant the apple trees?
Cider.
Okay.
It's almost immediate.
I did not plan that segue, by the way.
It's almost immediate. Well, because you have to realize that water, safe drinking water, is almost impossible to come by. They're incredibly worried about that, as they should be. And so cider was safer to drink than water.
Okay.
And they would actually make different levels of alcoholic content for cider. So most of the cider that the adults would drink would be more like the dry ciders that we have today, higher ABV, because the higher the ABV, the purer the content, so less worrisome you would be about getting sick. But even the kids are drinking it.
Oh, wow.
So they actually made Ciderken, which was a very low ABV content, but still had it.
Interesting.
And that was for the kids to drink.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know about marketing to kids these days, but there is a very big market that's emerging of a no alcohol or low ABV cider that we're seeing. So in the marketplace. Yeah, resurgence.
It's a resurgence, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think we're calling it Ciderkin, but maybe we are. I don't know.
And I was trying not to jump from apple to cider right away, but that's actually why the monasteries were growing apples as well.
Oh, really? To make
So
cider?
the monks were into growing grain for beer and apples for cider.
Okay.
But in fact, because grain doesn't always grow as well in the northern climates, but the apple does, cider was always way more popular. And in fact, cider was the most popular drink in England for a long time, and it was the most popular drink in North America and then the United States for a very long time as well.
Okay. And how does it eventually become so influential here in the Northeast and especially in New York?
Well, it's an easy jump from New England to New York. Plus, the Dutch are coming up here as well, and so they're also cultivating apples up further north, up in Esopus and Albany, those areas. So they're already doing that as well, because it's common across Europe. But then it moves into the Midwest, and that's the whole Johnny Appleseed thing.
Oh, okay, yeah. So tell me about Johnny Appleseed.
John Chapman is a real person, and he was nicknamed Johnny Appleseed while he was alive. So he was born in Massachusetts.
And when are we talking? What time?
Well, he was born right before the Revolution. So he's born in 1774, and he lives for 70 years. He dies in 1845, and over that period of time, first, when he was young, he was apprenticed to be, they called it an orchardist back then. So he was literally trained an apprentice to raise orchards. And he was a bit of an eccentric guy. He was a wanderer. He liked to travel. And so he starts heading out west very early on when he's young. And I guess some of us have seen the stories or heard the stories about him just dropping apple seeds as he goes, right? That kind of thing. That's not exactly what he was doing. He was moving into Pennsylvania, and from there he was planting apple orchards to make money.
Okay.
And then what he would do is he would get his neighbors to tend the orchard so he could move further west. They would get a share of the crop, and he would get the rest.
Okay.
And so then he moves from Pennsylvania, he goes to Ohio. From Ohio, he goes to Illinois and Indiana. I believe he dies in Fort Wayne.
Okay.
I'm not positive about that. Throughout his life, he was also an itinerant preacher. So during that period of time, that's known as the Second Great Awakening. So he's a part of all of this kind of new Christian movement. He's preaching to people as he goes, and he dressed very austerely. Like, he would trade apples for people's used clothes, and then he would wear those.
Nice.
Even though he had money to not do that. He wouldn't wear shoes. There were stories of him not wearing shoes even in winter. There is one myth that he wore a pot on his head for a cap. That actually comes from a woman who wrote about him in Harper's Weekly in the 1860s, claimed she had interviewed him, and then came up with this idea that maybe he did.
Yeah.
We don't know for certain.
Yeah.
But when he died, he willed 1,200 acres of apple orchards to his sister.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So was he in this area, in the New York area as well?
No, he went from Massachusetts over to Pennsylvania. I didn't see anything as I was researching some of this stuff. I didn't see anything that showed him having much influence in New York.
Yeah.
He's more how apples moved west.
Okay.
Right. So I think the Dutch are bringing the apples up here. I think then the New Englanders are influencing that, and you guys know better than I do how you cultivate apples and how you can use saplings to get different varieties and things of that nature, grafting. They're doing all of that. The Romans were doing that. So, so I don't think he's involved with that. He's He's much more about how it then becomes a national thing.
Yeah. And to your point, the Dutch coming in, that's a good example of, we were just talking about the fact that it was in the 1730s, I think 1737, that the very first commercial nursery was started, and that was in New York, and that was actually where Flushing is today. So that was the first commercial nursery. And then you flash forward 100 years, in the 1830s, the first commercial orchard of this country was started in Esopus, which is just right here in the Hudson Valley, which kind of brings us back to how important apples have been in this part of the world specifically.
Right, and it actually is an interesting story then, if you think about this. If cider was so popular, why is it that, at least when I was growing up, I knew nothing about cider.
Yeah.
Like, why was that? And that's actually because in the 19th century, with the large influx of immigration from Germany and from Eastern Europe, you get a whole bunch of people that are going to become a part of the working class, particularly in the Midwest, where grain is as easy to grow as apples, which is not the case in New England, is not the case in New York, right? They begin growing lots and lots of grain, and you can mass produce beer much better than you can mass produce cider.
Yeah.
And so beer becomes the drink of choice of the urban working class, which is growing.
Yeah.
And so throughout the 19th century, cider increasingly becomes relegated as a rural drink for farmers, and beer becomes the drink for cities. And of course, the population shift is occurring in the 19th century where it was mostly farmers and some people living in the cities. It flips.
Yeah. And to attract that vote, there's a big place in the political history of our country with cider. Like John Adams was a big fan. I think there's...
John Adams drank a lot of cider.
Yeah.
Yeah, he drank it morning, noon, and night. It was his favorite drink.
Yeah.
And George Washington's favorite drink was Applejack.
Nice.
Which is basically apple brandy.
Yeah. Perfect. Excellent.
Oh yeah, they
Jefferson,
all were.
Thomas
I mean,
Jefferson.
it was the most popular thing for them to drink.
Yeah, and then so all of this is going on, and it's certainly here, prevalent in the Northeast. And then we have a little thing called Prohibition, which happens in
we like to try to forget about
1920.
Prohibition.
Exactly.
So Prohibition kills cider.
Yeah.
The question is, why doesn't it kill beer? And the answer is because you can brew beer in large kind of industrial spaces, which once beer can no longer be legally brewed, easily transfers into bottling soda. So if you're going to bottle beer, you can bottle soda. But the same thing's not happening with cider. So you don't have these large plants, these large bottling plants for cider. So basically the beer plants shut down, but they stay in business by bottling Coca-Cola and all these other sodas. And then when Prohibition is lifted, you just turn the beer production back on.
Yes.
And the cider production never recovers, not until Jimmy Carter.
Yeah. And what happened with Jimmy Carter that made that happen?
Jimmy Carter, far-sighted man that he was, decided to, and I'm obviously with the help of Congress, because he didn't do it with executive orders like we do today, he decided to legalize home brewing. And by legalizing home brewing in 1978, all of a sudden you get a bunch of people that are really interested in brewing things that they can't find in the store, or that, brewing things, And so in certain regions like New York, you start getting these home brewing operations that turn into craft operations for cider.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a regional thing. If you're in a certain part of the country, you know about cider. If you're not, you don't. And that's the case until 2012.
Yeah.
And, so in 2012, Boston Beer Company decides that they're going to try marketing a cider nationwide. And they use their bottling plant and all of the industrial stuff that they have, that they have access to, plus their marketing, to be able to market a cider bottled by Boston Beer Company that goes nationwide. And that's credited largely for the fact that people in, say, Texas actually know what cider is.
Yes, it is a big, giant credit. Anybody know what the name of the cider is that Boston Beer Company bottles to this day? Angry Orchard. Yes. So that brings us up to contemporary. So we're going to talk to these amazing producers. Sean, I'm sure if people have questions, we'll pull you back in.
I wanted to ask Sean a question.
Yeah.
As far as also like the Prohibition, I've always heard and read that because, and we'll get into this in a minute with cider, but there's a lot of cider-specific apple varieties as opposed to dessert apples or grocery store. I heard at Prohibition everyone said, cut all those down, we'll never need those again. Right. And that was another big setback.
So one of the statistics that I was looking at and was really interested in, and it is in part credited to prohibition and the very thing that you're talking about, is that by the end of the 19th century, there were documented 17,000 different species of apple across the country, and a lot of those were for cider making. And by 1950, or maybe earlier than that, that was down to 4,500. So it killed a lot of the varieties because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, because a lot of them were for making cider, so nobody's going to make money off of that. And then the second reason is industrialization. So what happens is a lot of the small apple growers go out of business because we industrialize agriculture in the 20th century, and therefore you get a lot of these large farms. They're going to grow only 4 or 5 types, right? And that's how you get Golden Delicious, and that's how you get these other, Granny Smiths or whatever that are across the country. Everybody knows them, but nobody knows about, a variety just grown in New York.
Yeah. Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks. We will call on you again if we have more historical questions, but it's a really important point to note about the fact that Boston Beer Company makes this decision to start producing Angry Orchard. That's 2012. So in 2013, that then leads to Governor Cuomo signing the farm cidery license into existence, which was another big giant turning point for the cider industry here in New York State, which then leads us to 2015 when the New York Cider Association is formed. And at that time, there were only a handful of cider makers in New York State, and now there are over 125 licensed producers, and that's still growing. So it has been a tremendous amount of growth, and we're really excited about that in the industry here in New York State. So we're going to switch over and talk to these two amazing gentlemen here. I want just to introduce yourself a little bit, Chris, and tell us about how you got into cider making, what your history is, and quickly bring us up to speed there.
Again, my name is Chris Jackson. I'm the head cider maker at Treasury Ciderat Fishkill
And my
Farms,
boss.
and president of the New York Cider Association. I have a bit of if you want to talk to me later, I can tell you the whole story, but I have a master's degree in environmental engineering. I did that for a number of years doing water and wastewater treatment plant type stuff and pipelines and other stuff that I really didn't get a lot of joy out of. And then I decided, I'm a musician, I decided to move to Los Angeles, and I became an art director, and that was fun and everything. And then I met my now wife who lived here, so I moved here, and then none of those things, I didn't want to go back to engineering, I didn't want to, there was no Disney and Pixar and Lucasfilm in the Hudson Valley, so I couldn't do that job anymore either. And cider checked a lot of boxes for me. It's scientific nerdery, which I'm a big fan of. It's creativity, which I'm a big fan of. It's having a lovely beverage, which I'm a big fan of.
With some ABV.
Yeah. So I did it myself at home a few times. I have a small press at home, and I said, this is a good. I grew up in Florida, and then I lived in Los Angeles. So apples in general were a novelty. I'm like, ooh, apples, they grow on trees. You don't see that in Florida and California. So Northern California, but yeah. So I went to Treasury, and they were looking for a salesperson, I think, at the time, and they were like, we like you, but we're not sure that we have enough to sell. And I'm like, well, why were you advertising for a salesperson? But, they never did hire a salesperson, so that was legit. And then they were looking for an assistant cider maker later, and I'm like, this is actually what I want to do. I'm like, and I kind of shoved my foot in the door a few times. And
when was that?
8 years this month, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, I think
Excellent.
May is my month. So, and after about a year, I close to COVID, our head cider maker, who was sort of somebody that was put in the job, and we kind of did it together, but she sort of pulled back with COVID, and
yeah.
I'm like, I'll go in. Nobody else is at work. Well, I mean, barrels aren't going to give me COVID, and that's what I was doing, going by myself and working with barrels, and so eventually they said, you should just be the head cider maker because you're here and doing things, and yeah.
Nice.
That's where I am.
Excellent. All right, so Dan Fenyo, introduce yourself.
Sure.
Distiller here at Dennings Point Distiller.
Yeah. So I think I have a similar sort of trajectory there. Maybe less of the academic rigor in the beginning. My degree is in English Lit with a concentration in 20th century American postmodernism, which is It does not come into play very often here.
Perfect trajectory to distilling spirits.
You'd be surprised. I get asked to proofread often. No, I'm hyper local to the area. I grew up in Fishkill. I moved to Beacon some number of years ago and started hanging out here because it was a very delightful place to get a drink. That led into helping out with doing the tours. Our distiller at the time was sort of famously antisocial. He and I really hit it off, though, kind of led into a growing relationship of helping him with this and with that and this and that until soon enough, Carl and Susan were able to say, hey, do you want to do this instead of your main gig, which at the time was recruiting hapless kids from central New York to come to a private college, local, not West Point, you're okay, a slightly less esteemed college. And I said, yeah, absolutely, that sounds like the move. And it's just been a pleasure ever since. I don't have a master's degree in, what is it? Environmental engineering? Is that what it was? I didn't. That's a nifty one.
And when was that you started here?
Yeah, so I've been lead distiller since 2019.
Nice.
Looking for confirmation. Wow, holy moly. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think we're going to move into actually doing some tastings, and we are going to start with doing a tasting of cider. So as that's being passed around, I think that's going to start coming out here.
Is that okay did you guys want to have something to drink?
Want to try some cider?
Is that,
nice?
That's all right. Oh, good.
Awesome. Great.
Thank goodness.
So Campbell's going to start bringing that around. I want to highlight the fact that when I saw the job description for this role, I immediately reached out to Dan because I did not know a whole lot about cider, and I wanted to just understand something about the craft beverage space and have some degree of context. And you were, I don't know if I've even expressed this to you, but how incredibly informative and helpful you were in the process of really wrapping my head around craft beverage. And we had a great conversation, and that led to me getting the role in that. And then I started on March 1st of 2020. So you can only imagine what that history was like.
There's a small caveat to that in that I think I had cider twice at the time that we had that conversation. So.
He did work at Fishkill Farms when he was a younger.
That's true. That was the first list, first on my resume there. Yeah, that was not quite as sexy as making cider. It's mostly burning myself on cider oil, donut oil, which. Someone's got to do it.
Should I tell what everybody's drinking?
Yes. So let's talk about this cider that's coming out here that Campbell's
Yeah, so I'm going to
us.
jump in quickly. You guys are trying the Wild at Heart, which we're super proud that last year it won a silver medal as the second best botanical cider in the world at Glint Cap, which is coming up again soon, which we're hoping, we're hoping we can
cider.
get more glory next week when that happens again. But so this is a semi-dry. We're a pretty dry cider. We don't add a lot of sugar. This one, there's 20 grams per liter, so this whole bottle has like 15 grams of sugar, so not over the top by any means. We have two drier ones back there, but we felt like this is a big crowd pleaser. It is steeped in whole cone staghorn sumac that grows wild on our property, whether we want it to or not, so we figured why not use this. Middle Eastern spice, za'atar, some people know that for sumac. Watermelon Jolly Rancher is not an inappropriate tasting note. Berries. Just very popular. The color, of course. We get a lot of people come up. What's the pink one? We're like, well, it's more than pink, but I can tell you about it still. So this is Wild at Heart you're drinking now.
Nice. And for context, I always like to say if you were training for the marathon, getting to Fishkill Farms from here would be a short run. So, it's literally...
have to go back and forth a few times to train for the actual marathon.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that close. It's Fishkill Farms, Treasury Cider. It's a beautiful, beautiful space. If you have not been out there, I highly encourage you to go. It's absolutely stunning and gorgeous. So when we talk about the farm and we talk about the apples that you grow and putting them into your cider, let's talk about the actual process of making cider.
So the big takeaway with cider that, I think is one of the first things in general, Scott and I talk about this all the time. Education is hugely lacking for people with cider. I think people think they know what cider is, and 90% of them, you're like, that's not exactly what it is. But the biggest thing, exactly, that's all we do. The biggest thing to think about is that cider is to apples as wine is to grapes. It is the same process. It is, for us, it is super simple. We grind and press the apples at our farm. Everything we do with our cider comes from apples from our farm. We grind and press. We have juice that goes into tanks typically to start with. We have fermented in barrels, but typically we will move from tanks to age in barrels. But we don't even add yeast at this point. There's enough yeast on these apples that it will natively ferment, naturally ferment, whatever you want to call it, native fermentation. You can add yeast to sort of hedge your bets. We do something called a petit du cuvée, PDC. I don't say it other than PDC usually, but that is propagation of our own yeast. So every time we press for juice, we will allow that to propagate and get stronger, almost like think about like a sourdough starter. And then we will add fresh juice to that every time we press, and we just kind of keep that going. And so that adds plenty of yeast. What's on the fruit, what's on the skin, that will cause fermentation. So yeah, it ferments. We do a slow and low fermentation. Somebody that's doing cider multiple times a year. Again, we're like wine. We do one a year. We can go anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. We keep our cellars at 60 degrees to fully ferment. Some stuff, Harrison apples are a great example. We've had them go 2 months for reasons that I can't really understand, but it's okay. We check we do at least every other day, we check pH and specific gravity, which tells you how much sugar is left. We ferment everything down to dryness, and then with, I think, 4 of our 20 plus varieties, we back sweeten a little bit. That's kind of, aging, like I said, we move from stainless steel to barrels typically, or other stainless steel. You get it off what's called the lees, which is dead yeast, apple material that's at the bottom.
Is there any particular element that affects the choice of the stainless steel to barrels or vice versa?
Typically, we try to keep everything as separate as possible, meaning we grow almost 90 plus varieties of apples on our farm. I don't use all of them for cider. Again, the dessert stuff that we were talking about, we don't use as much of that because it's fine, but it's going to be less complex, less interesting, and we're into a little more higher end interesting cider. So yeah, I mean, if we know something is going to be, we have something back there called Bernot, dry, tannic, leathery. That stuff's all been in oak for sure, because you want that more complex, whereas what's in Wild at Heart, probably not a ton of oak. I mean, there's some because we have like 70 barrels, so stuff just goes into oak. But yeah, if it's a little cleaner, stainless steel is fine. If you want it to develop a little bit of that, oakiness. Oak also allows for micro-oxidation, so that can certainly affect things a little bit as well. So yeah, there is a little bit of thinking involved. We know where we want them to end up.
Nice.
Again, we try to blend after fermentation. Yeah. So we try to keep things as separate as possible. That doesn't mean, there's always a tank that says kitchen sink or something, because we just have a bunch of fruit left. So we'll just see what it does. And, that's useful too.
I think it's interesting to point out the fact that Chris is explaining his process, but just like wine, it's a vast category. So you can talk to, all the 124 cider makers that are in the state, and even people making cider at home, and everybody has their own process, which makes it so special and such a representation of the actual artistry of the person who's actually making it, which is why it's so unique and special. And so, any thoughts on the Wild at Heart? Yes. How much blending?
So for this one, and I always have to check because it changes. So everybody thinks, and quickly to Scott's point, we run into a lot of people that are like, oh, I've had cider. That's like saying I've had wine or I've had beer. And you're like, there's more than one, right? I mean, like that. So we do run into that. So this particular version, so this is a pretty big blend, which is not uncommon for us with semi-dry. So this is Golden Delicious, Macintosh, so some fruit that people know, but then Cavil Blanc, Empire, Winesap, Spitzenberg, Freckman Rouge, Harrison, Roxbury Russet, White Winter Pearmain. I forgot we even grew White Winter Pearmain. So you can see this one's a big blend, and it does use some dessert fruit because this has sumac in it and a little sugar. So when you're going to add something else, it's not as important. If we do a co-ferment with cherries or peaches or something, you could use a little dessert fruit because you care more about what's going into it than really the expression of the apple, whereas like something like Bernot, I think, has 3 or 4 in it. So yeah, I mean, the blending, so something like this, I'm betting that dessert fruit, I mentioned the kitchen sink, those were probably all in one tank. And we just said, oh, this would be a good, it's good volume, it's nice juice, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not terribly complex. And then we can put the sumac in there and sort of, amp it up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, there are 4 classes of apples. There are sweet apples, which are just sweet, like dessert fruit for the most part. There are sharp apples, so Granny Smith's the one everybody knows. meaning acid forward, and then there's bittersweet and bitter sharp, and those bittersweets and bitter sharps have tannins, which again, that Bernat back there is tannic, it's leathery. Nothing in the grocery store is going to have tannins.
Yeah.
That's not. So if we have bitter, like a group of bittersweets, they can go in the same tank. If we have, we don't want to press something and have 200 liters because that's a barrel. If we can put a few together and put it in a little bigger tank, that's easier and smarter. So yeah, there's a little pre-blending based on variety, based on a category.
Yeah, and it is fascinating to really start to understand the categories of apples, and especially as I've learned the apples that are used specifically for cider making, you would never ever consume them just right off the tree or off the grocery store shelf.
And also, that being said, Tim and I both do it. I eat every one of those apples that week. I always will try them. There are a few that you're like, woo, that's
eating a potato or something. But then once it ferments, it becomes this delicious, amazing, rich.
Crab apples are amazing in cider.
Yeah.
Everybody's oh. But a lot of people refer to cider fruit as spitters because you bite it and then But we have several that are super good to eat, but maybe not for the people in Middle America that just want Golden Delicious or Granny Smith. But yeah.
So thinking about the apple, we've talked about how it becomes this beautiful, delicious cider. Let's graduate and move into the space of once we start to put some heat to that and distill that. So Dan, talk us through how we get to an apple brandy space, what that's like.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that Chris began that with, it's really simple. Yeah, maybe in theory.
Hygiene is the most important part of all of this. Everything's got to stay. What's actually happening is pretty straightforward.
Sure, in theory. In theory.
Babysit it.
That's right. Well, it's funny you say apply heat to it, right? So even the word brandy, right? Do we have any linguistic nerds here? Does anyone know where the word brandy comes from? I'll be you get 10 points. Yeah. Yeah, well done. Yeah, absolutely. Brandy wine, Dutch for burnt wine.
There's those Dutch again.
Yeah, those damn Dutch are back. Yeah, so absolutely. So you've heard how we're getting up to the cider point, and really that is the point at which a handoff can happen, right? So in fact, that is really the root of our relationship with Chris and Tim and Treasury is we've had the great opportunity to distill some of their cider for any number of reasons, right? Either because it is extremely well suited to distillation, or sometimes, as Chris said, sometimes this is an organic process. On occasion, you get a flavor that you weren't exactly expecting. And while cider making is sort of intrinsically additive, right? You're creating new flavors. Distillation is, in a lot of ways, sort of intrinsically reductive, right? We are removing components of a volume of liquid to end up with ultimately what goes into a barrel and finally your glass and your mouth and stomach, ideally.
Speaking of going to the mouth, I think we have some tastings of the apple brandy as well, right?
Thank goodness.
Yeah, we'll pass those around.
Goodness.
So I'm sorry, don't interrupt you, but I love that whole reductive. I never thought about it like that before.
Yeah, it's something I try to keep in mind, right? Like, there are certainly opportunities in distillation, and especially in aging and barreling, where you are creating new flavors based on kind of the building blocks that are already floating around chemically in this soup of whatever it is you've fermented, in this case, cider. But ultimately, right, we are taking material away. We're taking volume away from that cider and being left with that volume of spirit, of ethanol, ultimately. Right, that's...
I was going to say, just also, Dan comes over with some frequency, and we have stuff that we think maybe we want to distill this, and he'll come and try it with us and say, yeah, I think we can do so, or you might want to dump that. Like,
yeah. I was going to ask you,
something
talk to me.
can go a little sideways, and you're like, no, I don't know that that's going to, the reductive part, I don't know that that's going to go away.
Yeah.
So this is, there's a very collaborative process.
And so, Dan, what is your process? Like, what is it that triggers you to think this is great or this is not going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking for are specific flavor notes, right? There are some things that, no problem, these are going to find very specific places in the sort of timeline of distillation, right? They're going to have a particular affinity for the very beginning of distillation or the very end of distillation, which is lovely because then you can just exclude those from what you are ultimately collecting. A great example of that is acetic acid, right? White vinegar. If you have a cider that begins to smell a little vinegary, a little sharp on the nose in a way that's not exactly the barnyard funk you're going for, no problem. We can totally deal with that. Ultimately, that wants to cling to those water molecules that really don't want. They take a lot of energy to get into distillation. And so that's totally fine, right? Some of the other flavors that are a little bit a little tougher, they cling a little bit harder to sort of the whole process of distillation. Things like diacetyl, right? That are they really want to murky up the entire process. Those are a little trickier to work with. We had that one really sulfuric one was really great, which is great because sulfur has a tremendous affinity for. Anyone? Hey, copper. Great. That's super duper. So if you put something that's kind of sulfuric in a copper still, it's going to stick to the surface of the still, which is great because then it stays out of your liquid, right? And you end up with something that's really lovely and you get all those great flavors with all those weird funky flavors added on.
And what's the time process we're talking about with the apple brandy?
Yeah, I mean, the distillation itself it's a few hours, right? This is I always feel a little silly answering this question. People ask with the brandy or with our bourbon, they say, well, how long does it take to make? And I say, well, it's a few hours of cooking the mash or, in the case, grinding your apples and pressing them. It's a few weeks of fermentation, and then it's about a day of distillation, and then we put it in a barrel and wait for years and years and years. So several years and a few days. Those extra days end up being a rounding error.
Yeah. So what we're tasting right now, how long do you think that's been in existence?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was distilled 5 years ago, ultimately.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. 2021, cast your eyes back.
So it is interesting to think about too, and we'll talk more about this later, but as we're trying to educate consumers and our whole ecosphere on cider, the whole aging process, much like wine, people really prefer to, age their wine or talk about that. That exists in cider as well. I mean, it opens up as it oxygenates and it sits on the shelf or whatever. Talk a little, how much of an understanding do you have about that, Chris, as far as that process?
I mean, I have an understanding in that I see how it develops and how it changes. As far as the pure chemistry of it, mild, but as long as there's no follow-up questions, I'll tell you what I know about it. No. It definitely, you can see something, and again, barrels are going to age much more interestingly than stainless steel. Stainless steel has it's sealed off. Nothing's getting in, nothing's getting out. It's a great way to store cider. I don't know if aging is the best word for something in stainless steel, whereas in barrel, or we have things called puncheons, which are like big wooden tanks, foeders, which are big wooden tanks, or puncheons, which are bigger barrels. Those there's definitely aging. I mean, Tim and I tried something I had in foeders the other day, and it is super oaky, which I like, but maybe not everyone. But you can blend that, so you can see a big difference there with something that's been in wood as opposed to stainless, which ideally something in stainless will stay kind of as it started, because if it goes too far, then Dan has to come over and which is a good thing, but we're like, maybe this is something we should, call in the cleaner.
And for you, Dan, how do you know when something is ready to pull out of the barrels?
Yeah, that's a great point. In the case of brandy, especially, it's something that I try to be sensitive to. It's you'll sometimes hear people talk about really any spirit being over oaked. Right, oak it's an accoutrement, right? You don't want oak to be your first flavor, typically speaking. In the case of apple brandy, in particular, to me, it's essential that you associate what you're tasting with apples. Right. Ultimately, we're dealing with something in which all of the sugar has been removed, right, which is common to Chris's product, but it's also undergone this very severe process of distillation, right? This huge reductive process, and for that to still resonate with your idea of what that fruit should taste like, right, biting into a fresh apple, that to me is paramount to your experience. So in that regard, the barreling is super important to extol that, not to cover it up. So as soon as you start getting something that, this is tasting a little bit too much like a barrel and not much like an apple, well, at that point we should just be making, I don't know, barrel flavored vodka, which it's on the market. It's fine stuff, but that's not what I want to make here.
Not what we're talking about here. So let's talk about ABV. So the cider, where is this at, Chris?
7.
Alcohol content?
6.7.
6.7%.
Oh no! Any teens in the house?
Oh God!
We typically go from 6.7. We typically go from mid 6s to as high as 10 with something we do called a cider, which is a mead cider hybrid. So obviously there's more sugar in there. So you have the sugar of the apples and then you add honey, so it's going to go a little higher. But yeah, we're typically in that 6.5 to 10 range.
Yeah, that is pretty standard for ciders, and we like to talk about the fact that it pairs beautifully with food, just like wine does. I think pairs more beautifully with food than wine does. And in fact, because it is that lower ABV, you can enjoy it over a longer period of time and very social drink. So let's go to apple brandy. What's the ABV of this?
So our apple brandy is bottled at 80 proof or 40% ABV, so a good bit higher. It's barreled much higher than that even. It's usually barreled about 115 proof. So pretty hot stuff. I think it's really lovely. If you happen to come in on a day where the garage door is open, don't tell the owners. I'll pop open a barrel. We can try something together. But
what are your thoughts on the apple brandy? Any questions? Nice. Awesome.
Oh, thank goodness.
Very good. Yeah, Raphael.
I'm curious, how does the ABV relate to like traditional Applejack, and what was the evolution from Applejack to the modern apple brandy? How does it differ?
I see. You're asking about jacking it. This is an essential question. You're asking about freeze distillation, yeah? Through sort of the colonial method of letting your cider freeze. You pull the puck of ice off the top, right? That's kind of, when people talk about Applejack, they're often talking about, that is a process which is referred to as jacking your cider. Just keep your minds out of the gutter, gang. So that's sort of a classic method. You're going to top out at a certain point, maybe 40 proof. Doing it through freeze distillation, you might get a little bit higher, but ultimately that'll depend on how cold a winter you get, right? Is everyone familiar with Applejack and the freeze distilled Applejack? Do you know about this? Oh, it's the coolest thing ever. Go home and do it. So if you have a volume of cider, if you buy several gallons from Chris and Tim, take it home, dump it into a bucket, and then wait for winter time. We know that water freezes at, give me Fahrenheit. 32. Well done. Thank you, Professor. Well done. Ethanol freezes at, again, Fahrenheit.
Oh, this one I do not know.
Minus 173. That's going to be on the test, guys. Remember. And so, of course, we have this disparity. So if you get your atmospheric temperature below 32, what's freezing? Or water. What's not? The ethanol. So you get this puck of water that's going to freeze off the top. You pull that off. Physically, you just lift the ice off, throw it off. And that's that reductive process that I was talking about that we usually utilize through hot distillation, sort of typical distillation. But it's a super traditional colonial method. Is this what you were referring to? Yeah, right on. It's super syrupy, super thick. It's intense stuff. It's really delicious. It'll give you just a terrific hangover. And not because of the sugar. It's super high in acetaldehyde. That's what'll get you every time.
Nice. Yeah. So, yeah, Chris.
And also to that point, if you don't distill that, we get into ice cider,
Yes.
which is another thing. So if you've ever tried ice cider, it's usually higher in alcohol and it's usually very syrupy.
Yes.
It's very sweet.
Yeah.
But it's quite tasty.
Much
in a
like
very small
the
bottle.
pommeau.
What a nice transition.
Let's
we've
segue
made.
to the pommeau. Yes. So tell us about the pommeau, Chris.
So, yeah,
and
I think-
I believe there's a tasting of this as well.
Yeah, pommeau
Perfect.
should be coming around now. So pommeau is a French term, and we're getting into a little thing with this.
Can we get a quick show of hands? Are you familiar with pommeau?
Yeah, who's ever heard
Yeah,
of
that's a good
pommeau?
question.
Oh, nerd.
Oh,
nerd,
okay.
nerd.
Awesome.
So,
Nerd.
exactly.
People that know me or you or Chris.
Collect
yeah.
your pocket protectors. No. What's that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you had it last week.
A Cider Week festival at Angry
Yeah,
Orchard last week.
indeed.
Thank you, Cider Week New York.
So pommeau is a French term. Not unlike there's an argument going on now that Scott and I have been talking about lately that like champagne, you have to call it sparkling wine if it's not made in champagne. There's a little discussion. They're like, oh, pommeau should only be made in France. Well, I don't think that's going to really stick for a while. It's also a very niche-y product. I mean, it's quite new. But so pommeau is the ultimate. We've gone in the right order here. This is the ultimate collaboration between the two of us. This is Dan and I got together, and we had a baby. Pommeau
And
is
it's beautiful.
about.
It has my eyes.
It does. It definitely your color too. That's good. So the brandy. So we would send cider over to Dan and say, yeah, let's distill this and start aging it. So Dan would do that, and every year or so, I'd say, send me over little samples. Let's see where everything is, because we typically do it once every year or two. So we have different stages of aging because they go into barrels after Dan distills it. So what you're tasting here is about 6.5 years here in barrels. So it comes over quite brown and lovely, as opposed to right when it comes out of the still, it's white, So that the barrel has done what we wanted it to do and put a little character into it. And then we will do fresh pressed juice that we let ferment ever so slightly. You let it kind of kick off, and then you put it in there with the brandy. This one has 7 different apples, all cider varieties, and we're like, we could do a single variety pommeau. We're like, you know what? Let's not get crazy. Let's do one to start with. And so this is all 7, but these are all high-end cider varieties. There's no dessert fruit, on the juice side. But when that juice goes into that brandy is high enough in alcohol that it's not going to ferment. So as everybody is tasting now, you're still getting a lot of sweetness out of this. It smells like you're getting like a strong shot of booze, but then it's super smooth. Caramely, again, apple forward, which is something that's important to us too.
And what is the ABV on this?
ABV on this is 19%, so 38 proof. I think 20 is about as high as you want to go with this before you get into a different world, which we are going to do apple brandy co-branded with Dennings Points ourselves soon, which will have to be co-branded because, again, you get past a certain point and you're talking about distilling as opposed to a farm winery, farm cidery license, which is what we have. So.
Yeah. And you would enjoy pommeau like an after dinner cordial or
aperitif, digestif, certainly.
Would we enjoy pommeau if Campbell brought 3 more samples up?
We definitely would, but
I think we might.
So far we've got nothing. I'm a sucker up here. So also, yes, you would enjoy it straight. You could put it over a little ice if you wanted to, but another very nice use of it, which Tim will talk to you about back there. Tim has made a cocktail that's outstanding that uses that pommeau. That's him. That's his head sticking out there. So that uses the pommeau. It uses one of our cider. It's pretty great. Go check it out. It uses our quince. He does a quince butter with it. I mean, it's crazy stuff that he's doing back there, and it's all pretty magical. But so yeah, great in cocktails.
Yeah.
Great on its own.
Yeah.
You could do old-fashioned Manhattan. You could back sweet. It's you can tell it's whiskey-like, it's bourbon-like, it's booze, so it's super flexible.
Yeah, any thoughts on the pommeau? Delicious, yeah. It is a really interesting movement that's happening in the cider space.
Thank you, Bob.
A lot of producers are making it, and I think the story is, cheers, that the original pommeau was made by Orchard Hill Cider Mill. I think Carl de Hoffman claims that out in near Wallkill. But as Chris said, there's enough of it sort of coming on the scene now that we are starting to see that space where the folks who actually make pommeau in France and are in that designated region have some degree of thought about the use of us using the word pommeau. So it's a perfect example of how this industry is real. I mean, you are watching it grow as we speak, which is super exciting to be in the space that we're talking about.
For sure.
And to that point, I want to talk a little bit about, one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is terroir. So again, in the wine space, it's not uncommon to think about, the terroir of wine and where it was grown. And terroir is really everything around climate and soil and weather patterns. But my favorite part of terroir is really the practice of the individual that's making that particular craft beverage. And so when people, regions that have terroir and, that are identifiable have certain practices. So I want to sort of apply that. We're spending a lot of time. I spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about this. We're actually working to trying to establish American pomological areas as opposed to American viticultural areas. AVAs exist. So when you see on a label of wine that it comes from the Finger Lakes or it's from Sonoma Valley, those are designated AVAs that the TTB has allowed those areas to designate. We don't have that luxury in cider yet. So we can't put on our cider labels that this is from the Finger Lakes or this is from the Hudson Valley. You'll see it done in very interesting ways, but it's not going to look like an AVA looks like on a wine label. So we're working on that, but it's a slog. But terroir does exist, and we're spending time thinking about that and doing sensory analysis studies and trying to look at the different growing patterns. And we've done studies where we've sent the same trees out to different regions of the state and really examine like what does all that fruit look like when it comes back, and does it have different flavor and terroir. So Chris, can you talk a little bit about sort of your orcharding practices and what your thoughts are on terroir?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not directly in the orchard very much, but I keep up with it and I know what's happening. And yeah, I think the biggest example of terroir, which I mean, obviously it's going to be, as everything like Scott said, climate and elevation, and there's all kind of things, soil makeup. That native fermentation that I mentioned before, that is really, really a huge part of it, because the yeast on our farm, if you go a mile away, that yeast is going to be different over there, and it's going to make a difference. If everybody pitches yeast that's commercial in a purchased product, and it's fine, there's much more stability with that, there's much more consistency. It's going to step on all of your native yeasts. I think that is where terroir becomes the most important thing. Our yeast definitely has a slight menthol character that you can pick up at times. There's things in there that, it's a little earthy at times. What it does, I'm very happy with, which is a good thing, because obviously some people might not love their native yeast and they probably have to do a commercial yeast. But for me, that is really the biggest thing. I mean, we are an eco apple certified farm. We do have a little bit of organic fruit.
And what does that mean, Chris?
Yes, organic fruit. Most people know what organic is. It's a lot of hoops to jump through to have something be classified as organic, and it is a very hands-off process, sometimes to the detriment of the tree and the fruit. You can't touch it, and then you don't get much out of it. So, Eco Apple Certified allows for IPM, which is Integrated Pest Management, which means, this tree is about to have a problem. There's insects, there's things that we need to treat for. What's the safest way to treat for them that's not going to affect the fruit terribly, but will allow us to have fruit? Because that's the big problem with organic. It's hard, and you sometimes run out of fruit because the bugs win. So Eco Apple is kind of a nice in-between from traditional growing and organic growing, and that's the majority of our farm. Like I said, we have a little organic, but not nearly as much as we do eco-certified.
Yeah. And it is interesting when you think about it. I mean, you really can, if you're paying attention and you're really starting to think about it, you can taste a distinct difference between Hudson Valley ciders, Finger Lake ciders, Catskill ciders, which is exciting to think about. We just have to come up with language and start to define that and have the parameters around that, which, you can imagine is a lot of work. And
it's like wine, same thing. People
exactly.
know different regions are going to have different, same grape, but different. And as Scott mentioned, we did a program where everybody got the same trees, and we sent all the fruit, and they all got fermented the same place, but all with native yeast. So nope. And Scott and I were a part of it's radically different.
Yeah.
I mean,
several years
crazy
this process has gone on.
We did it over the course of many years. So.
And how does terroir show up for you, Dan? Does that affect your space, or how do you see it in your space?
Yeah, it's maybe a more liberal usage of the word, but a common question we always get is, what sets your spirits apart from everyone else? And I wish I could say, it's the ingredient X that we add at the very end is what makes it special and delicious. And of course, that's not true, right? It is so often that there is a sum of many little parts, and that ultimately is what accumulates to our exact spirit, right? So whether that be, in the case of our fermentation in-house, exactly the conditions by which that happens. Things like the orthography of our still, which we've talked about quite extensively you missed an early seminar. We talked about the orthography of the still. Very important. But then you get into things like aging, where the exact sourcing of the wood that comprises your barrels, the depth of your char, the water you use for your proofing, all of these little tiny elements, they accumulate to create a product that is singular to this location, right? To the method that we use. And that all sort of compiles on top of what Chris has already described, right? So we're already using apples, which are themselves a representative of particular terroir. And so then we get to just sort of build upon that. That's one of the instances, I've talked about distillation being reductive. It's a great example of it being additive, right? This is where we get to build flavor on top of it, right? We use these beautiful barrels of white American oak. The oak itself is sourced out of Missouri, out of the Ozarks, or Missouri, if you got any real... or Missouri. They're assembled up in upstate New York. All of these little kind of elements, even the fact that the barrels that we use to age our brandy have been previously used to produce bourbon. They've been aged, had bourbon aged in them. So now you have all of that history rolled into it as well.
No, I mean, it's all good. I think it's a really important point to talk about the fact that even, it can come down to the selection of the wood that the barrel, that the beverage is going to sit in, and how specific that is to the maker, and wanting to, really have that heighten the flavor. When you think about, going back to the apple, I'm curious to know from both of you, do you consider your process sort of elevating the apple, or do you think of it as kind of re-envisioning or transforming, or, what's your, from start to finish, how do you perceive that process of the apple?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because I think, for the most part, elevating, because I think a lot of this fruit that we use, again, people are unfamiliar with it. You don't eat it. Now, that being said, we have talked about, which I really want to do, we want to do an event, so we're starting to do a lot of single varietals, so again, like wine. It's a little trickier with cider because, as I described before, the categories, you'd like a little tannin, you'd like a little tart, you'd like a little apple character. It's hard to find one apple that can do that, but we're sort of steering into the curve, as it were, with some of these. Like we have Collaos back there, which is a Spanish Asturian cider variety that we grow in Ian Merwin on Black Diamond. I think those are the only people in New York maybe that are growing it right now. It is tart, as you would expect, but again, with a single varietal, you do get a pure expression of just that apple. Whereas, I love Wild at Heart, I love the Burnout we have, but it's a blend that, I have decided on, and our, people I work with and the owners, we've decided this is what we want it to be. So we want to do an event where we have those single varietals,
yes,
and a piece of fruit next to it, so you can say, eat that Collaos apple. I understand not everybody's going to love it, but then try that cider and see if you pick up those characters and qualities that you should pick up some of it, but it's going to have been transformed quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think elevating, especially with that kind of fruit.
Yeah, it is a really good point to make that. Currently, most ciders you're going to enjoy are blends, but the single varietals are starting to become more of a thing. And it's much like wine that, if you think about nowadays, we ask for a Chardonnay or a Pinot Noir or a Malbec. That was not the case 40 years ago, right?
It was
we were
red or
asking
white.
for red or white. So you think about where the cider industry has the potential to go, and I think you'll start to see more and more of those single varietals. And we're even toying with, at the association, a lot of our sort of events that we throw really feature like a particular apple. And the good news about that is that New York owns so many of the best apples that make cider. People, we're doing this big production survey right now, and we're finding out that, 40 to 45% of our juice and our apples are going to outside of New York State. So we're excited to start to roll that out and share that with people. Like, we are really at the heart and soul of cider making. Yeah. What's your experience with apples and your perception of elevation or transformation?
I'm going to draw a line in the sand on this one. I feel really quite the opposite. I mean, I acknowledge that that's what's happening on the cider end of thing. For me, growing up in the Hudson Valley, going to Fishkill Farms was a field trip. I remember being, 6, 7, 8 years old, and they would take you and they'd hand you an apple and you'd, pull a tooth out on it. And so that is so embedded. I mean, it's like Proustian, right? It's that apple experience is so embedded in my soul. And so kind of in that respect, producing our brandy is something where I really have this sort of platonic ideal of what an apple should present as. And that's sort of this I'm snipping away at the edges to land at that sort of platonic ideal, at that kind of perfect shape. So it's very interesting to hear you're on the other end of that.
Yeah.
Well,
that's why we get along.
It's true, exactly. Ebony. But I would say also, to that point, yes, I do think you are trying to get to that apple character and apple note, but not with a lot of the fruit that I'm making cider of. You know what I mean? So right. A lot of the fruit that we're using, people are like, like Scott and I were talking about, people, they call them spitters. They're tannic, they're bitter, but I think we are saying the same thing, but different. When he's going at 7 years old to pick fruit, he's not picking an Ashmead's Colonel or a Newtown Pippin.
Right,
he's getting Honeycrisp and Granny Smith and stuff that.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, it probably didn't exist then. So. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to take some questions if you have some, but before we do, I'm curious to know from you all, if you had to switch places for a day, Or let's say a process of making one of your beverages.
Yeah.
What do you think would most surprise you?
I answered Scott. Or no. You're up first.
I think what would most surprise me would be my complete lack of knowing how to do what Dan does, because a lot of people are like, well, when you brew cider, I'm like, no, you know, there's no heat, there's no, so I have a general understanding of distillation, but no, I can't do what Dan does at all, and Susan would come in and be like, well, you're fired because you're not doing anything. You're just trying through everything. I'm like, well, this is a good one, So yeah, I don't know that I would, I think Dan would do better in my space than I would do in his space.
Okay,
I
Dan.
mean, not as well as I would.
What's your answer?
I couldn't agree less with that last bit. I feel the exact same way. There's a reason there are fire extinguishers every 10 feet in this building. Yeah, man, I am so glad I'm doing what I'm doing. What you're doing is so daunting and high-minded. We are where we belong, I think, yeah, I'm good. We don't have to do the Scott Ramsey switch for a day job swap. All
right, well,
I like it.
Are there any questions? Do you have any ideas? Sean?
That some of these Irish like feelings and others are used. Is it a requirement or is it just a choice?
It's a choice. It's a choice. That's a great question. If for those of you who didn't hear Sean's question, why do we use the past-used bourbon barrels to age our brandy as opposed to any number of other options that we could use, as might be the case for Irish whiskeys or scotches or what have you? It's kind of a manifold answer. First is that it's convenient, right? We produce a great deal of bourbon here. We have a lot of bourbon barrels which can't be reused for bourbon. Hey, let's reuse these for another really great local product that we're making. It helps kind of tie back into our branding. Beyond that, we often describe our brandy as being sort of modeled after Calvados, right? If we're just trying to emulate a Calvados, we just want to kind of recreate that, we would be doing a very different finishing on it. Ultimately, we are invested in creating an identity for ourselves. We don't want to make French brandy. I'm okay about that. What I want to make is Hudson Valley brandy, and the best way to do that is to use barrels that have already aged Hudson Valley bourbon. Yeah.
Nice. Anybody else? Yes, in the back.
I think that is very possible to be done, but I think we're also hedging our bets a little bit, maybe. Again, with these categories, we do have, and I'm sure this is true of wine grapes too. I'm not as well educated there, but I know several of them. But we have several bittersweet varieties that, if one craps out on us and doesn't produce, or it's a lot of this fruit is biannual, meaning it's not going to happen. It's going to happen every other year. We know, like the Bernat I have back there, I have several vintages of it, which technically we're not allowed to say vintages even. There's a lot of dumb stuff that happens with cider. They're like, you can't put a year on it. I'm like, why? Yeah. But we don't have a recipe. They're not the same every time. That's why I had to look at the bottle for Wild at Heart. There's no recipe for Wild at Heart. We taste and we decide, we got a good crop of, Newtown Pippin this year. Next year we might not. So what can I use that will, give me what I'm looking for? I know what I want Bernat to be. I have a general idea. I want it to be leathery, a little funky, tannic. I can't always have the exact same thing. So, yeah, you could grow a much smaller variety. And when I say we grow 90 varieties, 30 to 40 of those are for people to come pick. So I'm not using 90. I'm using probably 20 to 25 on any given year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's kind of the answer, is that you want to make sure you've got enough tart varieties or sharp varieties. You want to have enough bitter sharps. You want to have, that if something doesn't work, I can fill in that slot with something else if I have to.
Why the focus on a varietal is actually the point of the question. Why focus on a varietal, individual varietal?
Oh, why do the single varietals? I'm sorry. Okay, I misunderstood the question. Well, you got more information on this other thing. I think really the big thing is kind of what Scott alluded to. We want to just let people understand what these apples are and how they will what will this apple that you've never heard of, how will it be? What will it taste like? What will it do? So yeah, we have 6 or 7 now. I'm probably going to put a halt on that right now because we have more than we probably need, but it's a nice way to show off what does one, because I do think 95% of cider, if not more, is blended.
Yeah.
There's not much in the way of single varietals. It's taking on a little, it's gaining a little steam right now. But I think it's really just a way to show off the differences from apple to apple. So many people taste our stuff and they're like, what's in this that makes it do that? I'm like, it's all apples.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't, we co-ferment. We have a few things that have fruit, and this obviously has a little sumac, but I think 15 or so of our ciders are all just apples. So I think it's a nice way to just kind of show off the differences.
Yeah, we are. So I mentioned earlier too, we're in the middle of this big production survey where we're trying to understand kind of exactly what you're talking about and what we're discussing around, what kind of apples are actually being used and grown in New York State. And we really also want to understand the impact that the New York cider industry has on the apple industry statewide, because we empirically know it to be strong, but we don't have the data. So we're working on that, which will inform a lot of that. That data is going to come out this summer, so stay tuned for that. One more question. Anybody? Yes? Yeah, so Chris mentioned, so again, much like we cannot put a designated regional designation in APA, or we also cannot put a vintage date on the bottle. And really, honestly, my perspective is that it just comes down to the fact that when all of those TTB regulations were being put in place, cider was not around. So we weren't thinking of the fact, the TTB was not thinking about how do we also incorporate cider. I will tell you that cider, when you send your label to get approved on a cider bottle, it is considered a wine product by the TTB. It is a division of the wine category. So there's a lot of man hours and woman hours going towards making sure that we can put harvest dates. We're hoping that's kind of the next hurdle. Any minute, we're hoping to hear that we can do harvest dates. Well, this has been fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
For us too.
They're going to stick around. Yeah. So they'll be around if you have any more questions. I'm here too if you have any questions. Tim is here with the cider. Alana's back at the bar.
Go try that cocktail that Tim made. It's amazing.
I'll do a quick plug for New York Cider Week.
And the cocktail that that Dennings Point made too.
Alana, yes.
We have two, and they're both awesome.
There's a whole core and craft menu. If you want to know more about New York cider and you want to go visit cideries in New York State, I highly encourage you to download the New York Cider Trail app. There are postcards around. There's QR codes. It's a fantastic way to sort of map out your own journey. It's also Cider Week. You can join the New York Cider Passport Club and get 10% off of ciders wherever you travel to visit if they're listed on that. So that's a really exciting thing. There are stickers here for you. There are bags in the back. Stay tuned for more to come from all we're doing in the cider space and with apple brandies and pommeaus here at Dennings Point and out at Treasury. I just can't thank you guys enough for this. And again, thank you to Susan and Carl for hosting us. This has been fantastic. And also a big shout out to John Slackman, who is our videographer in town. He's amazing. And also a big giant shout out to Colonel Sean Sculley for being our resident amazing historian. Thank you all so much. We're here. Enjoy some cocktails or some cider, and we'll keep talking. Thanks so much. Cheers.